Go ahead and mention that because I'll mention it in the show notes, and then yeah, we'll do that as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead and mention that. Okay, well, everyone, welcome to the latest rendition of Young Red Angus Live. I'm your host, Jay Young. Today's sponsor is Regen Ag Labs. Regen Ag Labs is the lab that we've been doing to do our complete soil digestion test that kind of shows us how much nitrogen is in our soil that we can have access to with our Johnson Sioux. And this is about the time, if you're in Kansas or south, that you want to be doing your soil test. So if you're planning on doing Haney test or planning on doing the complete soil digestion test, contact Regen Ag Labs and see if you can work out with them your soil test, because they do a phenomenal job. So thank you, Regen Ag Lab, for sponsoring this episode. And then also sponsored by Young Red Angus, because I have a bull sale and I have to pay the bills. So our bull sale starts next Wednesday, ends the following Thursday at 1 p.m. You can bid on all the bulls at once, and that's it with my shameless promotion. Tonight's guest, I'm extremely excited about. We have Nicole Masters. Nicole hails from New Zealand, and in my opinion, she is an amazing expert on the soil health world, and she wrote this amazing book that I've listened to twice and my son has read. And so we are going to talk about all of those things in this episode, or this rendition of YouTube Live. Nicole, how are you doing this evening?
Very good. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm just saying, I had to go and do some dental stuff this afternoon. So we are on drugs. So feel free to ask any question. Bring on the shamelessness.
I screwed that up. I was supposed to introduce you.
I'm just putting that in like a disclaimer in case I say something really embarrassing later on. I'm like, what were you thinking?
I'm excited because I feel like just that fact alone has gotten us off to a great start. So, I really enjoyed your interview that you gave with John Kemp, and I kind of wanted to dive more into some of those topics. And so you talked about quorum sensing and quorum signaling, and a lot of people that are doing Johnson Sioux are going to be seeing the benefit of that, whether they realize it or not. And so I wanted to talk about those topics because a lot of my viewers come from the fact that they're wanting to learn about Johnson Sioux, and I have videos about Johnson Sioux. So I guess let's first kind of break down what it is and why it's affected positively by vermicompost, Johnson Sioux, or Elaine Ingham's method.
Yeah, so hold on to your hats, people, because I feel like there's a real need to geek out here, and it's incredibly practical. Like and maybe you don't need to understand concepts like quorum sensing. So if we think about quorum sensing, really discovered in the 1960s, looking at bioluminescence. How was it? You can go to the ocean at night and you splash water and like you get all that luminescence happening in the water. And it's actually chemical signals that, in that case, phytoplankton are using to communicate with each other and to turn on or switch on a gene for that gene expression of bioluminescence. So imagine you have, at any one time, you could have a strep organism or a disease organism in your body, but you're not virulent. Now, to reach a quorum, to reach a certain amount of organisms in one space, when that happens, they switch on a signal and now you have virulence. So it turns on the gene expression for, if you had strep throat, for an infection, now you have a strep infection. That happened because of a chemical signal that changed the behavior of those organisms. So it might be, biofilm production, it's happening in your gut, it's happening in the soil, the plant's releasing these quorum sensing molecules to signal to biology to switch on behaviors and switch off behaviors. Now, it's only one of the many ways that plants and microbiology are communicating with each other. So for instance, there are chemical signals released by mycorrhizal. When it goes to infect a plant, it'll release something called stragolactone to actually signal to that plant to say, hey, dude, don't worry about me, I'm here to help, and get past those plant defenses. So these chemical signals, these molecules are happening all the time. There's this chatter underneath the soil. And really, we're deaf and blind and dumb to the whole thing. The whole world is communicating around us and we can't see it or sense it. But on every single cell wall, there's hundreds of thousands of receptors waiting for a signal. And so we talk about quorum sensing. You can also talk about quorum quenching, which is a molecule, a chemical signal that will turn off behaviors on the other side. Right. So I often think of different signals that are happening in the soil that allows a seed to germinate. And what is it? What plant is germinating is responding to different types of signals. And that might be climactic. It might be you.
Sorry for interrupting you. I've got.
No, I was about to stop. So it was perfect.
Yeah. So the quorum quenching. So is that what's taking place if you build up a healthy population of, mycorrhizal fungus and other funguses within your soil? That quenching will take place to where you'll shut off the signals to some of those weeds.
That's right. So you can turn off the signal. You're basically changing that gene expression. And so, and think of gene expression as being how something behaves, how it responds in an environment. So we can actually have pathogenic organisms that are in the soil that actually can be beneficial because they're not switching on that gene expression for virulence, right? They're not becoming plant parasites, for instance. They're actually working in a beneficial way with other microbes in the soil. So the idea that you have this disease is not always, it's not strictly true. Like most of the time, disease organisms are actually beneficial. It's just we create the signals that then set the scene for virulence.
That is awesome. And it gives me so many other questions to ask. But I think that's the reason why I wanted to ask that question right off the bat is because, and by the way, you guys watching on YouTube Live, if you ask a question, I am not answering it, typing it tonight because I can't follow Nicole and the thoughts in my head and those.
We can't multitask now, brother.
So Kevin says the book is awesome. I have given away 3 copies. Awesome to you, Kevin. I would have responded to that normally, but I want to make sure that I'm focusing on everything that Nicole has.
Well, I appreciate it so much because the book is self-published and the only way that it's got out into the community is from people sharing it and word of mouth. So if you've got a copy, yay, thank you. And yay for the community of the quorum that's allowed that book to kind of get out and spread. Hopefully,
yeah. On the topic of your book, where's the best place for somebody to buy it that you get the maximum amount of funds?
Right now, buying it from New Zealand, which is a little tricky, right? So yeah, I think like Barnes and Noble and just the usual bookstores, but actually going to your local bookstore and having books like mine and Charles Massey's and Gabe Brown's, go and ask your local bookstore to be stocking books like these. It's amazed me sometimes someone will contact me and say, I'm in the middle of like the outback and your book is in our local bookstore. And it's only happened because someone's talking about it, which is so cool. So support local bookstores.
Yeah. So back on that topic of quorum sensing and quorum signaling, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't think that people realize, like when we think of Johnson Sioux, when people are getting into it, they hear, how much money how many bushels an acre were raised on corn and how we're able to reduce nitrogen, and that they get really excited about what they're going to save. But like when it comes to fighting weeds and weed pressure, to me, the key is being able to understand what's taking place within our soils, because if we're able to understand quorum sensing and what we can do to bring about the beneficial fungus and bacteria, but then also to understand our environment and what plants and crops we can raise, and effectively, if we're adding mycorrhizal fungus or if we're adding funguses and bacteria from Johnson Sioux, what are the benefits it's going to bring to our soil and what we're going to be able to raise. So I guess my follow-up question to that would be, when people are applying Johnson Sioux, how is it, and a vermicompost or those other ones, what's taking place is causing a beneficial impact onto the soil?
So if we think about all of these signaling molecules and all of what we call these secondary metabolites, right? So microbiology are releasing enzymes, they're releasing elicitors, they're signaling to plants. These communication molecules are really what's driving the system. So you might have seen that soil your undies. I don't know if you've done it at your place where you bury cotton underpants.
I have not yet.
Okay, super fun. So go and Google it, take a look, do this at your own place. So bury big white cotton underpants that your grandpa wears, and they need to be cotton, by the way, and bury that in areas where you have your highest yield, best performance. Bury that in some of your lowest performing areas. Bury it on the side of the road where nothing's been disturbed. And if you've got a great regenerative farmer nearby, bury your undies there. And so what you want to see is that those underpants break down to nothing, and all you're left with is the waistband. Now, what is doing that? What's doing that action?
I'm assuming it would be the fungus and bacteria that are feeding on the carbon within the underpants.
Yeah, and so I think everyone gives the credit to the microbes, but actually it's the enzymes, right?
Okay.
It's the enzymes that those microbes are really doing the lion's share of the work in the soil, is these metabolites, these different exudates. And so by what you're doing with the Johnson Sioux or really good vermicast or some of these more commercial products is you're either using products or metabolites that are influencing the soil, again, at this parts per trillion rate. Like the game becomes, how little do I need? How can I just tickle this system? And the way that we do that is with these different types of secondary metabolites. All right. And some of those are working through quorum sensing. Some of them are literally just like shaking each other to wake up. Like you've got a lot of dormant organisms in the soil. So if you think about the amount of biology you're putting out when you're doing your extracts, it's like tiny little drops. And yet we are creating this tidal wave of a response almost. And it's because those microbes are communicating to each other and switching each other on. And then they're communicating to the plant, enhancing plant health. That plant's in signaling to microbiology. And so you get this chicken and egg situation where they are working in tandem. But again, the plant just needs these tiny, tiny amounts to switch on behaviors.
So when we think of the word quorum, like does what the actual word mean? Does it mean group?
Yeah, it means a community that you've got a, well, I mean, we can use quorum in the English language. It's not a hugely common word, but yeah, that you've met a threshold, a certain number of people, like to have a quorum of people in agreement. Say at a meeting, you might need to say, hey, we need 6 people before we can make a board agreement on this, or a jury, you need 12 people to agree.
So when you have, so when I'm applying Johnson Sioux, Dr. Johnson brought this up, that he has seen tested soil and it had no mycorrhizal fungus in that soil. He adds Johnson Sioux to the soil and tested it later, and there was 24 different species of mycorrhizal fungus now present within the soil. So how is that taking place? How are we able to increase the population of mycorrhizal fungus within our soil by applying bacteria and fungus from a compost that has no mycorrhizal fungus, unless as a spore that flew in?
Yeah, so we've seen this happen in vermicast as well, and it was measured in terms of this 240% increase in mycorrhizal fungi through the addition of worm extracts. So it again, it's a signal. It might not be quorum signals, but specific signals that those mycorrhizae are responding to and going, oh, wow, there's a healthy host here. Because a lot of our ecosystems are really stressed. Those plants are not getting the nutrition that they need. They're not actually able to send these signals to their really important microbial partners. So once those plants are healthy, maybe you're putting extracts down with the seed and you're setting that scene. So now that plant can signal to its mycorrhizal partners. But it amazes me. We're looking at rangeland measurements out here, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, and seeing 0 mycorrhizal colonization in rangeland. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And it's nutritional. And I have a suspicion that maybe it is the anthelmintics, like the drenches, the porons. So there's some researchers that hopefully are going to go and do the work, and we can take a look, because something's going on, that those really necessary microbial partners are not waking up. And you're like, but it's rangeland, you know, it's not like anyone's out there spraying phosphate to turn mycorrhizae off.
Yeah. Well, I would assume, are these regeneratively grazed rangeland, or is it over? So could it be a possibility of compaction as well? Or have you seen mycorrhizal even when there's compaction?
Yeah, even when there's compaction, I mean, you think the hyphae on mycorrhizae are pretty extraordinary in terms of getting through tight soils. I mean, I used to think that mycorrhizae would be suppressed by compaction, but the research doesn't really support that. In part, there are different hormones that get released in compacted soil, so things like ethylene. So when you get ethylene production, that actually suppresses root production and root hair production. So if you see a suppression of mycorrhizae, it's probably because of the production of ethylene in compacted soils.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we're adding the Burma compost or Johnson Sioux compost, what effect, like, so I guess transitioning into like, how does that affect, or maybe I need to ask that differently. So GMO corn or wheat that's been bred specifically for production in high tillage grounds, like you brought up in that conversation with John Kemp, that they're finding that wheat doesn't have a relationship with mycorrhizal fungus. So how do we begin to check to see if our GMO corn and our wheat that we're growing even has a relationship with mycorrhizal fungus?
Yeah, and I think this is where it comes down to citizen science, is actually doing this work on your own place. So compare, you know, it might be the same growing conditions, but you have GMO to non-GMO, and take a look. We're seeing some pretty funky stuff in alfalfa in terms of Brix, so plant photosynthesis. We're seeing conventional, so, you know, just managed with all the chemicals and all the rest of it, and compare that to GMO, and finding that the conventional was running at twice the Brix than the GMO is. So something's happened in that process, that they've undermined that plant's ability to photosynthesize and then be sending those sugars out the roots and stimulating this whole process that we're talking about enhancing. And so those plants become very selfish. If they're only photosynthesizing at half the rate, they're not going to be sharing that with microbes. They're like, no thanks, buddy.
Okay, so like, is there a practical way that I can see if my plants have mycorrhizal fungus, or do I need to have studied microscopy? Why do I screw that word up?
That was pretty close.
Okay.
I'm not gonna tell you off for it. I think we can, if you want to get a dissecting microscope and just, you know, buy some stain, and this is something that you're really invested in, then by all means, I think do so. And we're going to do some training this summer here and do some microscope training, because it's very interesting to me, the microbial literacy of American population on a whole, just population wise. So in New Zealand and Australia, you know, some of the ranchers and farmers I was working with 20 years ago were using microscopes. But, you know, you could just send it off. So send off samples to the Region Ag labs and get a sample done. It's probably quicker and easier if you don't want to invest in a microscope. And you do need to train and learn how to use these things with a fairly high level of not high level of competence, but just, it's like everything. You got to practice and spend time on it. Oh my goodness, I thought I turned my phone off. How rude. I turned it back on so I could, anyway, it's fine. Yeah, so I think, yeah, sending it in, just getting staining. There's a number of labs that will do mycorrhizae for you. So take a look at your wheat cultivars, what's going on, and then does it make a difference when you start to bioprime and put some of these extracts and things down with the seed? Because we can reprogram those plants, but just because they've lost that ability to communicate doesn't mean that that is permanent. So using epigenetics, so keeping buying seed from regenerative farmers, and then biopriming by putting extracts on that seed, can we reestablish those relationships? Because many wheat cultivars are no longer communicating, one, with mycorrhizae, or two, with things like protozoa, and we need protozoa in the system for nutrient cycling, and the main avenue for communication from the plant to the protozoa has been broken, like kung fu, literally. So how do we reestablish?
Let's talk about that, because I think it's easy for people to understand, how mycorrhizal, how any kind of fungus, will bring micronutrients to the plant. But what role does protozoa and nematodes play as far as how they're being a benefit to the plant in the whole ecosystem?
So kind of think about those organisms a little like your keystone species. So that might be like a beaver, or like a beaver, right? Or a mountain lion, a bear. That there is the whole trophic pathways of energy that's flowing through that soil system, and who sits at that apex is a predatory nematode, and they are actually able to dictate bacterial to fungal ratios. So they'll get a signal from the plant that says, hey dude, there's too many bacteria in here, do you want to do something about that? And they will predate more on bacteria than they will on fungi in that process. And the plant's like, actually too many fungi now, can you do something about that? So there's these communications happening all the time in that balancing. But while they're going through that soil and eating the bacteria, they have different carbon to nitrogen ratios. You probably know this, right? So a bacteria might have 6:1 carbon to nitrogen, and a nematode has 30:1. So it has to eat 5 bacteria to get enough of that nitrogen, or enough of that carbon. And in that process, it has excess nitrogen, and it vomits that nitrogen out around the root zone. So very, very critical in our nitrogen conversations is what's happening with these gatekeepers, basically. And same with your protozoa. So they are ravenously eating bacteria. Like a nematode might be eating as much as 5,000 bacteria in an hour, where they are then just chomping through and excreting that right into that root zone.
So when people are like spraying to control the nematode population, like we don't have issues with, predatorial nematodes here, but in other areas people do. So what
you mean root feeding nematodes?
Thank you.
Yes. Very important. So the predatory ones are our friends. We love them. Yeah.
And I think that's important for people to understand, whether it's the biology within your soil, like nematodes or protozoa, like trying to kill bad ones is way more detrimental to the good ones. It's the same thing with insects. I might have spider mites, and I need to control my spider mites, so we spray the field. Jerry, Jerry, if you're watching, I hope you're watching this. We need to stop spraying for spider mites. But anyway,
please. You know what? This is really, really, really good and really cool, because you can test this for yourself in the field straight away. So one of the things that we've found with root feeding nematodes is there's a correlation with EC, so electrical conductivity in the soil, but also in the plant, and pH in the plant. So you can get sap meters. So we use the Hariba sap meters. There's an EC and a pH. And what you find is, so as your EC goes up, your electrical conductivity, there's a direct correlation with root feeding nematodes. Now that EC might be affected by things like urea it's affected by fungicides, and most interestingly, it's affected by nematicides. So when people are applying a product to kill the nematode, they make the plant more susceptible. So you can go out and measure this for yourself straight away. So I was working on a vineyard and they had a pH, get this, a pH in their sap of 3.5. I'm like, holy crap, that's like close to battery acid, right? You got a pH of 3.5. Now, I said, well, what's your fungal diseases? Because you'll see a lot of fungal diseases when we get pH that low. And they're like, oh, no, our fungicide program's working really well. I'm like, And they're like, oh, but we're replacing 15% of our vines every year to viruses. Oh, so those plants are basically just giving up. Now, what they noticed is when they came along to spray a fungicide, that pH would drop significantly right after. So you can measure that within 40 minutes. And what you'll find is your pH will drop, your EC might go up or go down, depending on what the chemical is that you're doing. And you can measure that in the field straight away and go, oh, wow, I'm actually just fulfilling the wet dreams of the sales guys, because I apply this product. Sorry, that wasn't very couth. I apply this product and I'm going to need another product. Great. Yeah, they're very happy because we've got to look after those supply people.
Well, and it's the same thing with stripe rust and wheat. So in Western Kansas, stripe rust is extremely common if you have a wet spring. And so if I go in and I spray to kill the stripe rust, then I just killed every single beneficial fungus that was, providing a benefit. And then I go in, the first thing that's going to come in next is stripe rust is going to come back. So we've had years where we had to spray for stripe rust twice. What is it like when I'm spraying a Johnson Sioux as a foliar application of vermicomposting? What is taking place on the stomata of the leaf that causes the plant to have a strong resistance to stripe rust naturally because of the vermicomposting or compost section?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, a lot of when we look in the literature to try and explain some of these things, you find studies just have that very narrow focus. And actually these things are all interconnected, right? So those fungicides, one, are influencing the health of that plant, the pH and the EC, the Brix as well. Two, they're disrupting, so you have a phylosphere, right? We all know about the rhizosphere, I'm assuming, so you know about biology around the roots, but there's also biology in and on plants. So we have a lot of microbiology live as endophytes. They're inside the cells of plants, in between those cells. So when we spray something that's that disruptive, you're kind of like wiping the slate clean on that leaf surface. And then the first things to arrive are going to be your disease organisms, because they are able to populate faster. Those fungicides don't wipe out all your fungi, right? And I think we've got to be careful when we talk about like these things are always this or this always kills everything, because it doesn't. But what we're doing is we're changing the overall health and nutrition of that plant. And now we're ringing the dinner bell for an insect. Right, could be that red-legged earth mite. Is what are we doing to disrupt that plant's overall integrity, the integrity of that entire soil, food web, microorganism. And I think like work into the seed microbiome is just realizing like there's just so many places where we have microbiology, and by applying Johnson Sioux as a leaf, as a foliar, I always like to put a little bit of a fish hydrolysate in. And I don't know if you do that, but the reason that we do this, and actually it was a friend of mine, Tom Harris, in 2004 that told me about this. So he was actually running one of the biggest fish fertilizer plants in the Southern Hemisphere, best fish product by far. And he was like, if you put microbiology in with the fish, it actually enters the phloem of the plant and then passes right through that whole plant system. And then that biology is living inside the plant. And I was like, okay, that sounds really cool. That research only came out like 5 years ago. Like this guy was so ahead of his time. But by putting that little bit of fish in there, what we find is it helps for that biology to enter into the cells or enter into the phloem. So cool.
So you brought up Brix. For people that don't know, can you explain why a plant needs a higher Brix level, what a healthy Brix level is, and then I guess we probably need to tell them about is a penetrometer, right? Or not, refractometer is what what is it that measures the Brix?
Refractometer, yeah. Yeah, I want you to think like the whole planet, what plugs the planet into the sun is the plant. So that plant is kind of like
Real quick,
that
what does
conduit
Brix
of
stand
energy.
for, Nicole?
Huh?
What does Brix stand for?
Brix is just Brix.
Okay.
Doesn't stand for anything
It's not
else.
an
It's its
acronym or
own
something?
word.
Okay.
So if the plant's plugged in to the sun and then driving that energy from the sun is then converting into the first thing it converts to. So, you know, the plant's breathing in carbon dioxide, taking up water, breathing out oxygen. But what it makes, the first building block is actually carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's carbohydrates, right? It's literally glucose, right? Is the first formation of photosynthesis. And so what a refractometer does is it measures degrees or percentage Brix. So it's measuring dissolved solids and sugars that are traveling through the sap of that plant. So just with a simple garlic crush, you can go out, you can be measuring how well is my plant performing. Is it outperforming the weeds? And what we find is most weeds are photosynthesizing higher than your cash crop. And that is a problem. That's a really big problem. And so it's a very simple tool. And what you find is, so say for wheat or any of your sort of grassy row crops, then you want to see a Brix of 12 and above. Regenerative producers that I work with are running in the early 20s, and you can taste it. So you can train your palate to be able to read Brix without having to have a refractometer. So just get into the habit of tasting everything. You know, what is the Brix of this? So many of our think lettuce, it doesn't have a very high Brix. You know, if you've got a Brix above 6 or 7, that's pretty cool. You'll find this stuff at the grocery store is like 0 to 2, and you can taste it because, well, one, you can't taste it. It tastes like nothing, or it tastes bitter because it's full of nitrates. Your alfalfa should be 16 and above. And then your legumes, most of your legumes should be 14 and above. So, you know, corn should be 12 and above.
Can GMO corn get to 12?
I've never seen it.
Okay. So why does GMO corn have a hard time getting to 12? And if it's not at 12, is it a healthy plant?
No, it's not. I mean, that's why you will see animals will choose to eat other corn varieties if they can. You know, and do that test for yourself. Put a pile out on the doorstep. Which one are they going to go for? Yeah, and I mean, maybe some people are getting GMO conventional above 12, and maybe they're resetting some of this epigenome, but
so let's talk
someone's probably going to go, oh, I've got a Brix of 14, but you also got to watch that that plant's not stressed, right? So if the plants are stressed, if they're under attack, if they're dehydrated, then their Brix is going to be higher because you're going to have less water, right? So we're talking about testing how plants that are healthy, what are they running at?
Okay, so what is it about GMO corn that keeps it from hitting 12?
No idea.
Okay.
No one's done the work, as far as I know. No one's doing this research because why would they?
Well, exactly. But so there's not money to be made in it. That's why.
No, you know, and so it becomes anecdotal. So certainly we have my experience with it, this is all anecdotal, but something's happened with the disruption of those genes to disrupt that plant. You know, they used to think, oh, you just pull one little gene out and it doesn't disrupt anything. And as you know, as a cattle breeder, if you select for one trait, those traits are all hooked into multiple other traits. Now you've got animals that are menaces and try and kill you when you go near their calves because you were focused on big round bottoms or something, you know?
I'm so glad you brought that up because, you know, especially with breeding cattle, there's so much of a focus on marbling, ribeye, phenotype, and we're so driven by those things that we're willing to sacrifice for foot quality, or we're willing to sacrifice for something else. And so it's like it's this exact same thing with corn, is that you know, I'm like, if I choose Jimmy Red, you know, which is something that we're planning on planting this year, if I choose that, I have a whole different slew of problems that I'm going to have to face trying to figure out how to raise Jimmy corn on ground that I'm taking from terrible to mediocre on its way
Mhm.
to great soil,
Mhm.
but I'm on this journey and I'm adding the Jimmy Red. I will have challenges, but in the long run, this is better. Like I can have a cow that's in the top 1% for marbling, top 1% for ribeye, but if her
Mhm.
toes corkscrew and she's not going to get bred or udders are going to blow out, there's
Yep.
literally no point in having those good of EPDs because the rancher can't function if he's culling cows when they're 3 years old. So
Nice.
I'm glad you brought that up. So when it comes to corn being unhealthy, aside from it being unhealthy to the consumer or to the
Mhm.
animals that are eating that corn,
Mhm.
what happens insect wise in insect pressure when we have low Brix levels, and what happens on insect pressure when we have high Brix levels?
Um, this whole question makes me feel really emotional. And I think it's because we're talking about a plant that for the indigenous was the most sacred plant, the
Mm,
most sacred. And then we've come along and we're growing it in a monoculture. We've gone and fiddled with its genes and we've totally corrupted it. And it kind of feels a little bit to me like we've done to the planet, is what we've done to corn. And so I don't think corn in itself is innately the problem. It's that everything in this country has corn in it. Other country, I was talking to someone about drinking Coca-Cola in New Zealand. It has sugar. It has sugar in every other country except this one, where we have to have corn syrup. It's like you're trying to figure out how to jam corn into every single orifice in this country, and it's like that's the problem. It's that we don't have any balance. So I think I have a problem with a tiny amount of corn if that's what people are doing, but it's the how. It's just like it's not the cow, it's the how. It's the same with corn. And we go and throw the baby out with the bathwater with so many things because we've stopped thinking in systems. Yeah, we've screwed up the corn like we've screwed up multiple other aspects.
So let's talk about the spider mite. So like if I have spider mites within my corn, it comes from a low Brix level. What are those predatory insects seeing when they look at a unhealthy plant like corn? What makes them attack
Mm.
corn and leave something that's healthier alone?
Yeah, it's 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 so interesting. Like I said, we are deaf and blind and dumb to these signals around us. And I was reading this account of a bison, and you could smell the bison from like 2.5 miles away. Like there's these volatile organic compounds that just the bison and the manure and everything's emitting. And you see that with dung beetles, as dung beetles from about 2.5 miles away, a dung beetle can zone in on these volatile organic compounds that a manure is releasing. So it's literally like in the distance, there is a fire burning and the dung beetle can see it. And it's the same with plants that are disrupted in some way. So Brix might be only one measurement. It could be, there's something going on nutritionally, or that plant has root feeding nematodes that disrupting its health overall. And so those insects can smell the compounds. The plant literally starts to emit a signal to say, hey, I'm dying, come and clean me up. Like it's almost like they're committing suicide. But yeah, there's these compounds. So more of these signaling metabolites that microbiology, that the insects. So if that's sap sucking insect or chewing insects, they're attracted to different types of volatile organic compounds that those plants are releasing when they are stressed.
Well, and John Kemp had another guest on, and I'm completely embarrassed that I can't remember his name, but he did an entire thing on plants that are healthy
Mm,
versus like that, like the whole show was about how plants, I mean insects will not attack plants that are
mhm.
healthy. And he brought up Tom Dykstra.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yep. So he
Yeah. Doing amazing work. And I think there's quite a few in the US researchers that are doing this kind of work. And I think for those of you concerned about insect pressure, instead of going out with something to kill those insects, go out to go, how do I support the nutrition of my plants? And this is why I think if you've got cash crops that you're growing, is monitoring those plants, being out there and really looking at what's happening in the sap, looking at your pH, your EC, and just having your your thumb on top of it, because you're going to get an early warning from that plant before you see any attack from insects, right? And so actually being able to go out and address that nutritionally, just to lift the overall health of that plant, and that could be nutritional, or it could be, you know, some of the extracts, you know, because extracts are not a silver bullet either. If you have like a major issue with a trace element, and that might be, we've talked a lot about boron last time I saw you, is, you know, if that's boron, that might be something you need to take care of, just to lift that plant so that plant can actually start to perform its job.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I, you know, with the situation that we're seeing, like we interseeded cover crops within our corn, and we weren't able to do it on this other field, or we could have done it, but Dad saw early weed pressure, so he said, "Hey, I'm going to spray this, so there's no point in interseeding cover crops." Well, the field that we sprayed with herbicide to kill the weeds, that one got attacked heavily by spider mites. The other one did not. And so the one that had multiple species cover crops growing within it had in my mind, a couple things were possible there. One, there's so many predatorial insects that might be killing the spider mites that there were spider mites attacking the corn, but you know, it didn't matter because the bees and ladybugs cleaned them up. Or that the field that got a second round of herbicide, even though the corn's resistant to herbicide, that still has effect of the fungus and bacteria populations within my soil on the glyphosate spray application. So that kind of could have weakened it from that, or the plants sharing micronutrients with one another within the multi-species cover crop field increase the Brix level of that field and on the corn, and maybe it had a higher Brix level. So one of those, I'm guessing one of those three things. Is there anything that you have a hunch that might have been taking place there over the others?
I think what it points to is why we all need to be doing these trials on our own places. Is that context piece, is just try something. Like I've had people say, well, we just, you know, the nozzles got blocked, and so this area didn't get sprayed. And actually, this is the only piece that doesn't have diseases. Is just to be able to see that for yourself is so powerful. And I also think that all of this is intertwined, and it's our human nature to want to pull one piece out. And it's like, all of that is true, right? That we haven't knocked out those predatory organisms, that we have all those communication molecules happening between your cover crop. You're going to have better ground cover, you're going to have better water infiltration, you're going to have less evapotranspiration. There's just all of these dynamics that happen by having a, you know, diverse cover crop, hopefully diverse cover crop in that system. And yeah, this is why we need to do this stuff for ourselves.
So you brought up the Native Americans and how sacred they felt corn was, and then they had, you know, the three sisters, which I believe was squash, corn, and beans. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so they knew early on, like, what other plants to plant with corn to see a benefit. What's the best way to see what will work best with the cash crop? In that interview that you gave with John Kemp, you mentioned that the wild strawberries had a huge benefit on the orchards where they were growing. Like, if, like as far as Jimmy Red growing that, is there other, you know, species of plants that I can grow that will have a net benefit to the corn? Or and then same thing with wheat, because we interseeded some turnips and radishes and clover into our wheat just to try some new things here and to see what might work with wheat without hindering the harvest of the wheat. Do you have insight to that, which would help those two crops?
I think there's probably people that would be better able to speak to this topic than me. And I think particularly if you look at what's happening in your own local area, you know, talking to your cover crop companies, seed companies. But I think part of what you need to do a bit of research on is are any of these species allelopathic? You know, are they releasing chemicals that potentially could suppress the growth of what I'm trying to grow, and potentially could be suppressing the growth of the following year's crop? So I've seen people kind of mess up. You could say, it's not messing up, it's learning, right? It's our trials, but they can be very expensive if you put a lot of seed in that's actually suppressive. And seeing people have things get away on them in orchard situations, that it can be incredibly detrimental to yield of your orchard. So I think doing that work, asking people in your community. But I think when you think about biologically, you're always like, what would be the natural ecosystem that this plant would have grown, and what would have been its companion plants, which is where the strawberry and alyssum, wild herbs kind of came up. Thinking in an orchard situation, they have a similar microbial community that they like. People go and put grasses and ryegrass and stuff into a mix around orchards, and that's going to be incredibly detrimental. So I'm just thinking for fine root hair growth and all that. So when we're thinking about corn, I always think legumes legumes fit in such a broad niche in terms of microbiology, that I think they fit well in an annual cropping system as they do in a perennial orchard system. I think like what you're doing is you're going to work out what works well in your ecosystem, how much diversity can you get, and really be pushing towards more and more diversity of species and diversity of families.
Yeah, and I think, it is one of those things too, where in some cases, like just doing your own test plots, doing your own research is going to be best. Like we saw, like, you wouldn't like certain things like that you don't even think about, but like flax, I'm like, well, that's a cool season. Why would flax work well in corn? But it handles the shade so well, and I see flax growing within my corn as good as it will grow when I plant it with oats in the spring. Where you'll see buckwheat, and the buckwheat's able to just get really skinny and fight up to get to the sunlight, and then you'll see other species. Like I've done wheat before, and wheat will get up this tall and then it'll die because there's no vernalization, and it can't handle the canopy once the canopy is complete in August. And so there's certain things that work well, and there's certain things that don't work as well.
I was thinking Phacelia would probably fit in that mix as well too. Thinking outside the box about what we can put in that's providing multiple benefits for soil health and pollination, and like that. I just love Phacelia. And you think all that pollination effect, the flowers, then that's what the roots are doing as well, pumping nectar out to the microbiology. So the more diversity you can get in that mix, and I think even if something only grew 4 inches, it's still done some benefit in your environment, and those roots are being shed while that plant's growing, while your cash crop's growing. So I think there's so much exciting work happening in this space. And I think even if you look at, someone's, doing this mix and it's working really well, that doesn't mean that it's going to work well for you. So, I think as a community, getting everyone that's, within a 100-mile radius and going, can you try this and I'll try that, and actually starting to collaborate with the experiments that are happening, I think is really valuable, so that it's not all on your shoulders to work this out. And hopefully you have got some buddies that are like, oh yeah, I'm keen to experiment.
So Nicole, as we wrap up here, I want to talk more about you. So when you first came to the United States, you were traveling a lot and doing a lot of consultant work. How have you transitioned now, and what is the main thing that you're currently doing in your work with soil health?
So right behind me are the first walls that are my own of a house in 8 years. So like actually stopping, and it's been really cool and really overwhelming. So like having to coach myself through the process is kind of cool. So like I don't see myself as an expert or a consultant, like very much a coach, and just kind of like, okay, feeling overwhelmed, where do I start? And it's so powerful of getting your hands back into the ground when I have been, living vicariously other people's lives through, staying with people and seeing what is this rancher dealing with? What's this farmer dealing with? What are they experimenting with? And then going, okay, I have to do that here. So This is going to be small scale, so this will be an educational center. We're calling it the Underland Lab. And the plan is to really have this as a center in Montana for regenerative thinking, systems thinking, retreats. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of program design. So I feel like I'm really out of touch on the microbiology side of things, because a lot of what we're doing is designing programs for organizations. And it's really fun and really rewarding. But yeah, it's like I'm passionate about too many things, and that's a problem. You kind of go, okay, we just got to drill in.
I totally hear you on that. So if somebody wants to work with you, what's the best way to, are you doing consultant work right now, or okay?
No, so we're training the trainers. So if they're interested in working with someone that's done our kind of systems thinking framework training, we have a fellowship that's on the Integrity Soils website, so people can actually reach out and speak directly to a coach who could actually come out and visit, take a look, do transects, do the diagnostics with you, and help you work through some of these decision-making processes. Because I think the hardest part, as you know, is that upper paddock. And and there's so many options, there's so many different ways to go. You don't have to go and do Johnson Sue. You don't have to do cover crops. You don't have to do livestock. It's like, what works well in your context, what makes your heart sing, what do you love to do, and not feel like you're pushing the proverbial uphill. And I think I've always had coaches for different things. Like I have a profit coach right now. I've had professional development coaches in the past. I just think having another set of eyes and ears is so valuable for all of us, because often a lot of this stuff's in our blind spot, right? We can't see what we can't see. And it could be that, like, deep down you don't believe that you deserve success, or deep down you don't think that this is going to work. And working with someone through what is that's putting a drag on your system is really cool. So I do recommend people get hold of the fellows. And we're pretty tied up.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I just got a life coach in December, and it's funny because I talked to him about everything I was wanting to talk to him about. Like I need to schedule things, I need to be more organized, and he goes, "Is anything else?" And he's my pastor's life coach, and so I brought up, well, when I pray, I'm extremely distracted. And he goes, "Okay, I can help you with one or the other in the beginning, but I can't help you with both. Which one do you want to focus on?" I was like, well, my spiritual life is probably more important than being organized with this stuff. And I've seen more growth in my life in the last 4 months than I have in any period, in having this person that's able to see outside the box. And so I'm really glad that you're focusing and putting energy into this and helping people, get these coaches that are going to help them see outside the box stuff that they may not, see or understand. Whether it's reading your book or watching you on YouTube's or listening to your interview with John Kemp, every time I hear you, I learn something new. So I've really enjoyed this. So Nicole, if somebody's like me and they're in a position where, like, I'm on the board for the CCTA, and we're reaching out to you to get you to speak, what is the best way to contact you if somebody wants to get you to come do a workshop?
Yeah, so same as the fellows, you can just email off the website and say, hey, I'm interested in a speaking gig, and I will be available for speaking after November. So there is that. Yeah, and I want to say hats off to you, Jay. I think you're doing an incredible job. I think that this YouTube channel is great. I think all the content you're putting out is so fantastic. And I think this is a big part for all of us, is that ability to be vulnerable and share what we're learning, and share, okay, don't have all the answers, we're just trying all this stuff, is what's going to make a difference in this world. Because if we all started operating that way and stop worrying about what the neighbor thinks and just kind of really let those barriers go, then so much more becomes available. And so, yeah, thank you for the work you're doing. It's fantastic.
You're welcome. It's funny because, like, there'll be times I think about it and I'm like, there are so many people more qualified than me to do like a YouTube channel or to do what I'm doing. And so like it gets to where sometimes I'm like intimidated by what I don't know or where I'm not at yet. And
Mm,
in my mind, I feel like when I'm able to get past that, in my opinion, lie, when I'm
mm,
able to get past that and realize like so many people are either where I'm at or where I was, and they
mhm,
need a voice that is either on the same place or journey that they were, and they can go back and watch my old YouTube videos and
mm,
see how little I even knew in 2022 compared to what I know now,
mm,
and see that there's this progression. And that's kind of like why, like, I've thought about taking down some of my old YouTube videos when I was getting started because there's
mm.
so much misinformation. And I was like, so like instead of doing that, I made a YouTube video where I'm reviewing one of my first YouTube videos. That's
That's
wrong. He was wrong right there, and so it's like I love that aspect of it because like, I every single person's on a journey,
yeah.
and helping people realize that like it's okay to not know things. It's okay to hear the word microscopy or whatever I'm trying to say 1,000 times and still not be able to say it.
Yeah.
Or, like it's okay to not have all the answers or to be
Mhm.
wrong on something and be
Yeah.
corrected later,
Yeah.
or to hear people talk. Like I've had people say, well, Elaine Ingham is a quack, or Elaine Ingham, her composting style is way better than Johnson Sue's. And like people have all these like disagreements and variances and
Mhm.
stuff. And I'm like, listen, you said that on John Kemp's deal. Being dogmatic is one of the worst things we can do in
Mhm.
regenerative agriculture because
Yeah.
when we
It's
set,
the death of innovation.
yeah,
The dogma, and I also think the comparison, like comparing yourself to others, is the death of vulnerability and the death of speaking your truth, because you could compare yourself to anybody and go, I don't have that same intelligence and
mhm,
land or good looks, and it's totally disabling. And it's like writing the book. You put a line in the sand. That book was written 6 years ago. Would I change stuff? Oh yeah. Am I going to let it keep me up at night and have like people send me a message and go, wow, this is the latest? And I go, okay, that's cool, that's great. And I'm going to keep learning. But I think
and
the
you're going to
minute that
write
we
a
get
second
stuck and
book that we're
entrenched.
all looking forward to.
Yeah, yep, no, yep. I just got been approached by a publisher, so hopefully working on that this winter. I love writing, honestly, it is so fun. Yeah, writing and riding my horse. If I just had two things to do, I'd just do that. Yeah, but I mean, I think we're always constantly learning, and I think the ego is probably the main one, and it's that little voice, right? So it can either be something that empowers or disempowers, and it always feels like a roller coaster of you're not all that, or you're not stupid either. Like
Yeah,
I fluctuate from like, oh man, I'm so smart, and then I'm like, oh my god, I'm so stupid. And like, okay, neither of those is true.
yeah.
And so like trying to like hitch my ride to either of those stories doesn't help me. So getting really masterful with the inner voice, I think, is probably the most powerful thing I've done in my life. And I'm not masterful. It's like just constantly learning. But yeah, it's the work, because that enables you to try something new and not worry about failing and not worry about the peer pressure of dead people.
So we will mention
Mhm.
integrity soils in the notes for the show notes. Is there anything else that they need to know before we go and before I ask my last question?
Mm. I really would love for you guys to sign up to my online courses. I got a bunch of sort of foundational, like how do you assess soil health, a masterclass, and one for horse owners too. Because, despite what people think, you can build soil with horses. And in fact, historically, people have done that. And also, I really recommend a soil mentor through VitaCycle. So it's a app for assessing soil health. But what's really cool about it is, one, it enables you to kind of look at how healthy is your soil, and then Someone keeps knocking at my door and I'm ignoring them, but they keep knocking.
This
How
is
healthy is my soil? And then actually being able to compare yourself to others, and not in a bad way, but like actually how well do I show up in all of this? Hi.
Hey, hi, I'm Jody.
Hi, Jody. I just do it.
I'm a neighbor.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a black.
Okay, I will look for your black cat. Generally, leave me your number. I'm just on a live webinar.
Oh, okay.
Lady's lost a cat.
Hi, everybody.
I couldn't keep ignoring it. Well, I will look for your cat. All right. Okay. Gotta do the neighborly thing. All right.
That-
yeah. So
that-
I mean, I think that's pretty much
that
us.
made my night.
Anyway. Yes, please. All right. Well, thanks everybody. This has been great and really
Wait,
awesome.
Nicole, my last question I've got to ask you.
Yeah.
Aside from me, obviously, who has had the biggest impact on your life in the soil health world? Or not me, I'm saying who, like the other part of it was.
I'm like,
who-
well, there might be
No.
that ego piece for Jay.
I screwed up the question because I was going to say who was the funnest person, aside from me, who was the funnest person to speak with, and then who has been the best person. So I screwed up my own.
You were trying to get me to say
Yeah.
that.
I botched it completely.
Oh my gosh, I love co-presenting. There's some people that I've just had a riot with. Lauren Poncha, I want to send love to him because his sister just passed away, and it just my heart goes out to you, Lauren. You know, nothing like an Italian regenerative ag guy to speak with. Geez, he's a hoot. Just oh gosh, you know, I've done some tours with some just incredible people that maybe weren't fun, but just an honor to spend time with. Like Dr. Don Huber was mind-blowing to be able to just travel with him. Steve Erickson, who's with Chaos Springs in New Zealand, was kind of one of my early just incredible compost. So we had a lot of fun. And then Thelma Williams was one of my original vermiculture inspirations. You know, I think coming from the other side, there's a lot of names that you guys haven't been exposed to that have been doing this work for like 30 years. And I was just, I don't even know how I got to be so fortunate to meet some of the people that I managed to meet and get to travel or tour.
Yeah.
You know, that's just, and now I feel like I've probably offended some people that have just been a blast. You know, I have a wish list too of people I'd love to kind of go and hang out with too, like Vandana Shiva, and I would always go and do some more stuff with John Kemp. He's just talk about deep, heart-centered work.
As you were answering this question, I thought, man, what an unfair question.
It's so mean.
If somebody asked me, you know, who's had the biggest impact on your life there, soil health, I'm like, there's so many people, and to like mention all of them, like I feel like I'd offend somebody, but
I would go on tour with Glenn Elzinger in the drop of a hat. Oh my gosh, he's a hoot. We have so much fun. It's like, and you know, when I look at what our mission statement, or like, we kind of did this process of looking at what's our signature, like what, not our signature, but what kind of makes integrity soils. Fun was number one. And like my core team, we just have a blast. Like Megan Lannon and I, like, it's amazing we get anything done because we just have so much fun. Like I've never laughed so hard. And I kind of think that for me is the mystery of life, is like literally how can I just bring more joy? And that joy, I think, rubs off on the land and on your animals. And there's your checklist of, okay, I'm not bringing enough joy today. My dog looks a bit bedraggled. She hasn't, you know, got enough loving. But yeah, I think that is a really tricky question, Jay, and I probably have offended some people, but I've been very, very lucky in my life to have had the experiences that I've had. And I don't even know how it kind of happened, but I'm very grateful.
awesome. Well, Nicole, that's all we have. I'll go ahead and stop the live stream and make sure I get from you.
Well,
all.
if there are any questions, I don't mind answering a couple now that the neighbor's left and she can't find her cat. If there's something there.
Sarah
and then
asked, it was mine. It was just a statement. So Sarah Faye apparently knows you from Australia. She says, mind blowing to have you and Professor Don chatting in my.
Sarah Faye.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that whole Don Huber tour was thanks to her. That was extraordinary to be able to stay with her, and yeah, just bringing minds together, bringing differences of, I think, age, sex, culture, skin color. Like, we need more diversity in the people that we surround ourselves with, diversity of minds. Like, I like being around people that I don't necessarily agree with, and I think we've forgotten that piece too. Like, bring on the diversity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this guy just pointed out that he was getting rid of his drenches on all of his animals. We did Sidectin for the longest time. Like, I stopped doing other forums other than Sidectin because they don't kill dung beetles. But somebody mentioned that there are new studies out that say it possibly affects their reproductive tract. And so I'm going to go ahead and, like,
Yeah.
I did pour on for our bulls just so they weren't losing hair prior to the sale. But other than that, like, I didn't do my cows this last time when they were scheduled to. So I'm just going to stop altogether.
Yeah.
I have seen the dung beetle come back. So I'm really excited about seeing it, even come back, because I'd never even seen a dung beetle around other than I would randomly see them roll up, antelope dung on our farm ground. But
Which is
excited
a good
about that.
sign. But I'm always a little wary about just pulling the rug out without addressing nutrition. And I highly recommend Pat Colby's book, Natural Cattle Care, and just get really interested in what's behind some of these issues. And that might be foot rot or pink eye or lice or worms. They're all there as a signal that there is indicators, and they're telling you something. And so the more that we can kind of bring in these different observations and these different understandings, then the more powerful your health program becomes. But she was brilliant, and it's a shame, yeah, she passed away a wee while ago. And just, another one that's lost, just incredible wisdom.
I think they were too intimidated to ask questions when I said that I wasn't going to be reading them.
Oh, you're going to listen to it. Okay, that's cool.
I've got a bunch of statements, but I don't have a lot of questions. So,
people with their statements.
That's
yeah,
right.
fabulous.
Well, thanks very much, Nicole. I really appreciate it. I'm sure the people watching really appreciated it. And if you hang on here, I'll go ahead and get all that information so that we get that on the show notes. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. That